Well, good afternoon, everyone. I thank you again for joining us on this webinar today about claim for exemptions on safety data sheets. The webinar itself should only be about 30 minutes. We've left a fair amount of time for questions at the end of the session. If you have questions, please send them in online. The lines are on mute, and we won't be able to take audio questions. What we're going to review today is what claim for exemptions are, how you apply for them, timing, what the content of the applications are, cost, who could use claims, where and when. So what is a claim for exemption? It is an exemption from having to disclose what you consider to be confidential business information on either your safety data sheet or for employers on the label of a product. Why do we have claims for exemptions in Canada? It's because it was a compromise between industry, labor, and government so that companies like yourself can innovate and protect your intellectual property while still meeting the requirements under the Hazardous Products Act and Hazardous Products Regulations to communicate with workers and protect their health and safety. One of the key points I'd like you to take away from this is that a trade secret does not have to be a new or unique or innovative technology. It just has to be important to you and that you've taken steps to protect that information. What you could use a HMIRA registration for is on a safety data sheet if you're a supplier, and on safety data sheets and labels if you're an employer. Of course, that's something that Dell Tech does, is that we offer safety data sheets, and we can also help you successfully register your claims. What it can't be used for is anything that is not subject to the Hazardous Products Act. So that would include consumer labels, pesticides, fertilizers, cosmetics. Because those products are exempt from the Hazardous Products Act, they're not eligible for a Hazardous Materials Information Review Act claim for exemption. Your application under review would probably be declined. That leads to an interesting question. If those products are not subject to the Hazardous Products Act, do you need to comply with the requirements of the Hazardous Product Regulations for safety data sheets? And we see more and more pressure on this as the supply chain and retailers are asking for safety data sheets, even for non-workplace products or for products to which it doesn't apply. So there's a bit of an art form at times when you're writing an SDS for products that are technically exempt from the requirement to have a safety data sheet. As I mentioned before, is what can you disclose or what can be exempt from disclosure? So you could withhold the chemical identity of a hazardous ingredient, and that would be the chemical name, the proper chemical name, and or CAS number. Typically, you do both. You don't do one or the other. You can withhold the concentration of a hazardous ingredient, which you can withhold that entirely. You don't necessarily have to use a range. There were amendments to the Hazardous Products Regulations last year allowing the use of ranges, but if you would like to withhold it entirely. Another and very uncommonly used mechanism is to withhold the name of a toxicological study that would identify a trade secret for your hazardous ingredient. Employers, they could withhold the name of a hazardous product or anything that would identify the supplier of that hazardous product. So what you would end up doing is coming up with an in-house label that would replace what your supplier is giving you or the SDS. That is a fairly rare use in itself. I would guess that probably 99% of the claims are actually supplier claims for hazardous ingredient or concentration. And there's very few supplier claims that are withholding the name of a hazardous product or the supplier of what that hazardous product is. And essentially what you'd be doing as an employer, withholding this from your employees because you're concerned that that particular product or ingredient you're using would become public knowledge and give an advantage to your competition. To summarize, who can file claims? Well, for suppliers, you're the people that make the products. You're either making a raw material or a finished product that you could make a claim for the chemical identity, which is the chemical name and or the CAS number, the concentration in that product or products, or the name of toxicological studies that identify what your substance is. An employer can make claims for all 5 of those things. The additional 2 are either the name of the product that is being used or the identity of the supplier. But keep in mind, as an employer, you still have to have a safety data sheet for that product. You still have to communicate and train your employees. You're just not telling them where you're getting that product from. The program currently is managed by a division of Health Canada, is the Workplace Hazardous Materials Bureau. In the past, it used to be a standalone commission, the Hazardous Materials Information Review Act Commission, which was an arm's-length body from Health Canada. When the rules were changed for WHMIS 2015, that commission was dissolved and authority came back within Health Canada to manage the program, which is going to include accepting and reviewing the applications, managing the registrations, publishing the decisions, and working with the applicants. And we'll get more into the nuts and bolts of that in some of the further slides. Now, how to review it, there's 2 elements that Health Canada has to review under the Act. And the first one is it a valid claim? Is there information to support that you are taking the claim seriously, the trade secret? Are you taking measures to protect that? We'll get into more of those details in the next slides, but they refer to that as claim substantiation. And they also have to assess whether that claim has actual or potential economic value. And if it was released, would you suffer from that, or would your competitors gain? And what they mean by economic value is, in a more common term, is best referred to as revenue, is the actual sales, where the financial loss or gain would refer to the profit portion of that. So if you sell $100 of product, how much of that is actual profit versus covering your costs? And the second element is the safety data sheet that relates to the claim. So your application will include both the information on what you're doing to protect the trade secret, but they also will review the SDS in its entirety from Section 1 right through to Section 15, even for elements or for substances that you are not making a claim against. The cost of the claim is a concern at times. Currently, the fees went up on April 1st for your first 15 claims. The fee to the government is going to be $1,839.60 per claim, and I'll touch on that concept in a minute. For your next 10, it was only $408.80 each, and then everything above 26 is $204.40. Starting this year, the fees are going to go up annually on April 1st based on Stats Canada Consumer Price Index. So every April 1st, they will issue the new fee schedule. I want to touch on this idea of the fee per claim. What they really mean, that's the fee per product. If you have a product with 3 different chemicals in it and you want to withhold all 3 of them, it's still one claim and one price. You're not having to pay for each of those 3 chemicals. The way they've worded it is a little bit cumbersome. The other thing to keep in mind is if you want the reduced pricing for what we'll call the bulk discount, those submissions have to be put in at the same time. So if you've got 25 products, you have to put all 25 applications in at the same day. You can't put in 5 this month and 5 next month, and 6 months later keep doing 5 a month, and 6 months later you won't get the discount. It's an all or nothing game. There is a allowance for small business fee reduction. That's if your annual revenues are less than $3 million Canadian, and you have less than 100 employees. You have to meet both of those criteria. Then the fees would be reduced by half. And I'll touch on that as we get into the specifics on how you pay your fee and what you're estimating as the potential revenues for the product you're making a claim on. How long does it take to get the registry number? The 7 days, they have a management policy, and they're very quite good at that. But your 7 days is from the day they get a complete package. If you were to be missing a form, or you have a mistake on the form, you forgot the fee form, they haven't started the clock yet. You'll get the registry number within 7 days, and I'll discuss how you can start using it but that doesn't mean that your application has been approved yet. They now have to take what you've submitted and review it. There used to be a management policy that they would do it within 150 days, but the actual experience is taking between 2 and 3 years for them to actually review your individual application. When WMIS 2015 came into effect, they got a rush on applications. Right now, there are 3,000 active claims, but there's a backlog of 2,700 of those have yet to be approved, reviewed, and approved in full. So what we're finding is it'll take 2 to 3 years for them to finish reviewing the application. At that point, you'll get a statement of decision. We'll discuss that in some of the further slides. And then there's a appeal period after the statement of decision, and that's when your 3-year clock starts. Practically, you'll have that registration number more likely for 5 to 6 years, and you can use it the entire time. When I mentioned the 30-day appeal period, it is a public notice, and they will publish their statement of decision that company ABC has been granted for products XYZ, and what they refer to as an effective party can appeal that decision. An effective party may include an employee of your company. It may include a union or labor group, another government agency, so like a provincial or territorial Ministry of Labor. But who it's not your competition. Your competition cannot appeal or interfere with your claim. On the application form, there's 7 sections to it. On part 1, this is mostly administrative. You're going to identify who your company name is and who the contact is at the company. This is what they would refer to in the regulations as the initial supplier. This is the company that is actually responsible for making the product, putting the product on the shelf. In part 2, you're identifying what type of claim this is. Is this a supplier claim or an employer claim? And you also identify the nature of what a claim. Are you making a claim for the chemical identity or the concentration? If you're an employer, are you making a claim for both of those things, or additionally the name of the product or the identity of the supplier? Part 3 is the product identifier. This is actually the name of the product. This is the name that's going to be on your safety data sheet. It's the name that's on the container, and of course those 2 things must match. The application form is a smart form that there's a radio button to add additional product identifiers. So you could have one form with 10, 20, 50, 100 different product and applications on that. And we'll touch on that on product identifiers, where under the hazardous products regulations, you may have a generic SDS with multiple product names on it, provided that the hazard classification is identical for all those products. There's not a parallel allowance under the Hazardous Materials Information Review Act and regulations. You get one registry number per one product identifier, even if the formula is absolutely identical. If you have 2 different product names, that'll be 2 different applications, 2 different fees, and 2 different registry numbers that go on it. I would point out that most of parts 1, 2, and 3 are not protected information. When applications are made for a claim for exemption, that is a public notice in the Canada Gazette. What they do publish is the name of the company that's applied for an application, the name of the product that you've applied for, and the nature of the claim. They may say that you've applied to hide the concentration and identity of 2 ingredients, but it won't say which the 2 ingredients are. They don't publish who the contact is. They won't publish anything about what your estimated sales are. The formula, of course, does not get published anywhere. It's just simply an administrative process to say an application has been received and who it was received from. In part 4, this is where they get into the more specifics of what the claim is. So this goes to the first test of the claim, is that you are treating the information as a trade secret. It's referred to substantiating information. On the form is simply a checkbox that you consider the information to be confidential. But what you should have ready to submit if asked for is information such as, do you have non-disclosure agreements set up with your suppliers and business partners? Do you have confidentiality agreements for your employees? How many employees within your company know what the proprietary information is? How many people outside of the company? If you were to use Dell Tech to help you with your submission, there's at least 2 of us who know the information. You, because you've come to me, and me, because you've had to supply the information. You also have to check what security measures do you have in place. Do you have firewalls on your computers, password protection on the computers? Do you have restricted access to your building? Is there a receptionist at the front door? Do you have a key card access? Is the facility fenced? Depending on the setup, you might want to address if you have shaded windows, so people can't be peering in the window over your back, reading your proprietary information. They're also going to ask for the estimated economic value of the product, and what that really means is sales, and the risk of financial loss to yourself or financial gain to your competitor, which really just means profit. They also ask for R&D costs. That's entirely optional. It's not a requirement that you put substantial research and development into a product. It's just important that you feel that is important to your product, and if your competitors knew, it would have material damage to your company and your sales. As I mentioned, you don't have to put the information in at time of application, but you have to have it ready if they were to ask for it. In the past, prior to WIMS 2015, I found that 1 out of 3 applications was being asked for this information. But with the backlog that they have now, I think it's more about a 1 in 10 they might ask for it. If you have multiple applications in, they might ask you, say, in the first few of them. But now that they have a comfort level and the information is on file, they won't ask you again if you have several dozen or several hundred materials to go in. Part 5, of course, is the fees. That's the most important part as far as the government's concerned. Nothing will happen unless you put the fee form in and payment. You will check on the application form whether you're paying by credit card. They do accept credit card. Or if you're sending a check. If you send a check, it is made payable to the Receiver General of Canada. If you're paying by credit card, there's a separate form to fill out and complete. Part of the fee calculation is whether you're going to apply for the small business fee, and there's 2 check boxes that you're checking. No, you do not have more than $3 million per year in revenue, and that's for the company as a whole, not for the specific product you're applying for, and that you don't have more than 100 employees, and both those criteria have to be met to get the 50% fee reduction. But think back to part 4 under claims substantiation, where you're giving estimates of revenue, and ask yourself, do the potential sales of the product you're applying for match with the small company claim? You may get questions or asked to be confirmed if you're checking that you make less than $3 million a year as a company, but you're projecting revenues for that single product of more than $3 million a year. Those 2 values don't align with each other. Part 6 is the signed declaration. It's simply a part of the form that you're attesting that all the information that you've submitted is true and accurate, and that the claims you're making meet their criteria. The last part of it is the confidential business information, and this is really the actual formula that you're submitting. As a supplier claim, if you want to withhold a chemical name or chemical identity, the CAS registration, you have to complete and submit the full 100% formula to Health Canada. That includes the proper chemical names, the CAS number, the percent composition. If your product has a range, you will be asked to justify why there's a range. So in cases where you're using formulation chemistry, typically soaps and detergents, where your bill of materials or formula is going to call for a specific composition, you might have a hard time justifying saying you've got a 10 to 20% range in the formula. If it's a variable process because you're making a unique variable or complex material, typically in the oil and gas industry where that does vary by feedstock, it'll be more well understood why there's a range there. If you're making a claim to withhold a chemical name, you'll have to provide what they refer to as a generic chemical identity, which we'll discuss in some of the slides coming up. But you have to give it to them in both English and French, because yes, you must have both English and French safety data sheets and labels as well. As far as the administrative part, when you make the application, parts 1 through 6 will be separated from part 7. Parts 1 through 6 go to the administrative side of the Workplace Hazardous Materials Bureau. They enter the claim, they charge your credit card, they publish the notice that an application has been made. Part 7 goes to a screening assessment officer, which is a different person within the organization. And so they have access to confidential business information, but no one else within Health Canada does. This is a screenshot of part of the application form under Part 3, and you can see here the PI stands for Product Identifier. This is the name of the product. This is the name that's on the container. This is the name that's on your SDS. And you would fill it in there. In the far field over here, the subject of the claim, you would use these A, B, C, D, and E codes to indicate what you're making a claim on, the chemical identity of the ingredient, the concentration, or if you're an employer, the name of the product, or on the label. They've also asked you to indicate the source of information that was used to prepare your SDS. So you might refer to supplier raw material safety data sheets. You could refer to, if you've actually done testing of some kind, you would identify what the test reports, if you've done, say, corrosion test or acute toxicity testing, or if you're accessing information in various databases, such as the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, the ECHA database, some of the proprietary ones like Ariel or Lolly, and you're doing a weight of evidence to calculate your hazard classifications. And this is the radio button on the bottom left-hand corner here, that if you click that, it would add a new field for product identifier number 2, so you can put multiple products on this single form. That will trickle down through to the fee calculation as well. If you make 2 applications, of course, then your fee is going to be the $18 and $40, or so, sorry, the $16 and $80 roughly. And that's important that you have that. Now, the concept of creating a generic chemical identity, you have to come up with a name that would be on Section 3 of your SDS that still would allow a healthcare professional or health and safety professional to identify the class or the type of compound, but still keep it generic enough not to give away which specific compound it is. While in the common vernacular, people refer to these as trade secrets, you're not actually allowed to use a term like trade secret or proprietary, or even generic names like surfactant or solvent or fragrant, or kind of a long, confusing name like long chain hydrocarbon containing sulfur and nitrogen. That really doesn't tell them enough as to distinguish whether your product is, say, is an alkane or an alkene or an aryl product, or perhaps a substituted polymer of some kind. Some acceptable examples, if you have a really basic chemical, say like hydrochloric acid, there's not much you can do with that. You can use a fairly generic term like inorganic acid, but at that point, you've really narrowed it down to a choice of 5 or 6 different acids, because people are going to be able to guess whether that's hydrochloric versus phosphoric or sulfuric, carbonic, boric acid, maybe hydrofluoric acid. The more complicated your substance is, the easier it is to mask it. So if you have a multi-substituted long-chain hydrocarbon with different functional groups, you could hide the number and location of substitutions. You could hide what the specific element is. So you could hide whether it's a fluoro versus a halo, whether it's a alkene versus an alkene versus an alkane. And this is part of the challenge, is to come up with something that will be acceptable for the regulation, but obscure enough to stop people from making an educated guess as to what your substance actually is. And that's something that we often help people with. Worst case scenario, if Health Canada doesn't like it, they might suggest something back to you. At the end of the process, you get the outcomes and decisions, and the screening officer will issue what they call statement of decision as to whether the claim is valid as per the regulations. So the first element is the claim valid? Have you taken the steps required to keep it trade secret, your NDAs, your firewall, password protection? You're not advertising it. It's not on ethical data sheets. You don't have it written on the label. I've never come across an application where the validity was refused on that. If you were to take in the efforts and you could document that you are taking the steps to keep it confidential, they will accept it. Some of the things that would possibly get it denied or refused is, yes, if you've published a website, and perhaps for a different jurisdiction. So if you are an international company, look at your European, your Asian, and your US SDSs, because they will Google search. And if you've disclosed the information with the same product identifier, the same product name, then the cat's already out of the bag. That'll be grounds for them to deny the application. If you're advertising that it contains the substance, if it's on the label, if it's on your sales sheets. Also keep in mind your SDS that are you accidentally disclosing it in other sections? Think of sections 8, where you have exposure limits for substances, section 11 for your tox values, section 14, transportation, where you need a proper shipping name. Keep in mind, while you need a section 14 on the SDS, the content is optional. I know that SDS has become almost a default regulatory dossier for products, but if you put your trade secret substance in the proper shipping name for TDG or DOT, similarly you've disclosed the information. Or in section 15, chemical inventories, if you're listing something or identifying it to make sure that it is or is not on, say, the DSL or NDSL or TSCA, or if it's Prop 65 listed, and increasingly with different retailer initiatives for disclosure. If you disclose it on your SDS there, it will negate your claim as well. Of course, the second part of the test is Health Canada assessing whether your SDS is compliant or not compliant. They do review it entirely from start to back, even for the parts that you're not making a claim. You don't have to make a trade secret on every component that would have to be disclosed in Section 3. But what they'll do is their detail is the review is very, very detailed. They have a large database of information that is not always available to industry that they've collected over the years. They have hard copy of different tox data report that you may not be accessible through your common or normal databases information. But the common non-compliances in the last 4 years, the number one is there's no Canadian initial supplier on the SDS. You have to remember your SDS must have a Canadian address on it, and the initial supplier being defined as either the company that manufactures in Canada, or if the product is imported, that is the first party to receive the product in Canada. Other common things are administrative. You're missing subsection headings. So, for example, under Section 9, physical chemical properties, you have to include every subheading, such as specific gravity, color, odor, appearance, vapor pressure, water solubility. Even if you don't have that data, you still have to have the subheading with the either the data point, not applicable or not available. They may comment some of those things. There's just no reason for that information to be missing. There's really no reason to have not available for the color, odor, appearance of your product. This happens. It happens often. The other and the more tricky part is they may find toxicological values or exposure values that you were not aware of, but they have information on it. Particularly, our experience is if they find a lower LD50 value, and it may be for some of the more uncommon species, not necessarily rats, rabbit, or mice. They might find something that was based on a dog toxicity test or another mammal. and they would like you to put that information in that particular section. And the other and less common is if you simply have not correctly classified the product. They'll come back and tell you, well, we feel it is also an irritant, or that it's it is toxic, if they don't agree with your outcome is. So you'll have three choices will be presented to you if you find that your SDS is non-compliant, because it's not a showstopper for the application. They've already assessed that it's a valid claim because you've taken the measures required to keep a trade secret. You've established that there's economic value to it. It's not a showstopper on the SDS itself. So option number one is you'll make the edits that they ask you to, and you resubmit it with a form that they call a compliance undertaking, and you do that within 30 days. Option number two is you don't make the changes. What Health Canada will then do is publish a public order that those changes be made, and it will be specific enough to say, change your classification to include irritant or whatever was missed. Add this LD50 value, add this exposure value. The third option is to appeal the decision. You don't agree with them, you don't want to do it, you can appeal. There is a application fee for appeals. Ironically, the appeal fee is more expensive than the initial application fee. What we find is, I don't know if anyone's actually done it. Appealing the decision, I think, is a cure worse than the disease. Your path of least resistance is number one. Go ahead and make the edits and sign the compliance undertaking. At that point, they'll publish the notice of decision. There's a 30-day window for someone to appeal the decision, and now the clock starts, your 3-year clock starts on that registry number. So at this point, you've been using it for a year or 2 years, you're going to get it for another 3 years, and you can go forth and be profitable. In 3 years, when it expires, you have to renew it. There's a reduced fee for renewing it, but you will get a new registry number. So the registry number always expires. You will not have it for the entire lifetime of the product. If you don't make the edits and they've published an order to make the changes, when you go to renew it 3 years later, the SDS that you submit, if it doesn't have the changes that they ordered, they will refuse the application right at the door, and you'll have to come back and you'll be paying the new fee, not the renewal fee. So to summarize some quick points for you, when can you start using the registry number? As soon as you get it. So you apply, you have a complete and compliant package. Within 7 days, they will notify you by email what your HMIRA registry number is and the date of filing. And when you need to update your SDS, you're going to have to do it twice. So you get your registry number and date filed. You have to add that to the SDS. Typically, that's done in Section 3. But there's nothing in the regulation that says where it has to be on the SDS. I have seen it in Section 3. I've seen it in Section 1. I've seen people add it under Section 15, the regulatory information. To me, intuitively, you put it in Section 3. It makes it easy to find, easy to understand. There are some sophisticated end users and customers out there that might have a very strong health and safety committee. They're looking for these things. They will look to see if that registry number is actually registered to you. I hadn't mentioned this before, but the registry number is specific to the employer, or sorry, to the manufacturer and the product. It can't be shared. If someone's doing a private label version of your product, they would have to get their own registration number. If you have a company merger or your company's bought or sold, there's an administrative form to transfer ownership that way. The second time you're going to have to update your SDS is when it's finally granted and you get the notice of decision. So you'll have your registry number on the SDS and the date granted. When do you need to renew? You'll have to renew when you get the expiry date. That's something you will be notified of. They don't send reminders, though. So when you get your notice of decision and they tell you the date granted, calculate it with 3 years, set yourself a calendar reminder before it expires, because they're not going to call and tell you that it expires. You would also have to renew if you change the formula. Once you change the formula, that negates the registry number entirely. It's a new formula. It would have to be reviewed entirely. Pardon me. And when you submit your renewal, I would suggest doing at least 30 days before it expires. I know that they're quite good on getting the registry numbers to you in the 7 days, but save yourself some time. Because if you only submit it 7 days before it expires, you get your number back on day 7. That's not enough time for your own staff to update their safety data sheets and then start to distribute them. So we'll open up the floor to questions. If anyone has any questions, please send them through the online portal. So one question that does come through, as the person asks, just confirming that you cannot claim trade secret for shipping. So if you want to claim hydrochloric acid as a trade secret in Section 3 of your SDS, you cannot use this for transportation. That's correct. The hazardous materials information review claim for exemption is applicable only to safety data sheets and labels. It has nothing to do with the transportation of dangerous goods. So if you're shipping a hazardous material, say the hydrochloric acid, you're going to be Class 8, PG 2 or 3, depending on what your test data is. You'll have to choose the UN number that's appropriate to what you're shipping and disclose the proper shipping name, but you're doing that on the shipping manifest. You don't have to put that on the safety data sheet. I know it's a matter of convenience to put it on Section 15 of the safety data sheet so that the people working in your shipping department have a quick and ready access, but you don't have to put it on the SDS. That's going to be a bit of a business challenge on how you're going to make that information available to who needs to put it. Second question, there's a revised version of the form available in the 2019 fees. The form you showed was the old one. Yes, that is correct. When I put this webinar together, I was using the old version of the form. You can get a copy of the form from directly from Health Canada, from their HMIRA webpage. And because it's a smart form, it automatically has this year's 2019 fees. I did not talk about the consultation document that is shared with the claimant before decision is made. I don't think they do this anymore. They used to send a consultation document that reviewed the SDS before they shared the notice of decision. I've not experienced that. We found it was often confusing for the clients. This participant is advising me, yes, they still do send the consultation document. Perhaps some of the applications he made were sent in several years ago. If you look at the active claims, there are applications that were put in 2015, 2016, for which a notice of decision has not been made yet. The bulk of my applications, I have not received a notice of decision, so I might have a different experience about the consultation document. I'd like to thank you for pointing that out. So I'm not receiving any further questions. As I pointed out on the final slide here is my contact information. If something comes to mind after the webinar or the next few days, or if you had technical difficulties of some kind, please reach out to me directly and we'll help you. We will not be sending copies of the presentation, but we will be posting the webinar online on both YouTube and on SlideShare. And we'll keep a copy, we'll include a copy of the Q&As that we received. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you on our next webinar.